It is early May, and the war in Europe is ending. You can feel it in the air, the tension unraveling, the gunfire growing distant. Soldiers on both sides are exhausted. Not just tired from marching or fighting, but tired in their bones, in their hearts. They have seen too much. American forces are pushing eastward through Germany and into Czechoslovakia. The Third Army, led by General Patton, moves carefully now, though Patton himself is restless. He has always been a man who moves forward, always forward. But orders from above tell him to slow down, to wait. The Soviets are coming from the east. The map has been divided. Lines have been drawn. And yet, on the ground, in the forests and villages, no one really knows where those lines are. Imagine yourself there for a moment. You are a young soldier, maybe 22, maybe younger. You've crossed an ocean. You've walked through France, through Belgium, through the shattered streets of German towns. And now you're here, in Czechoslovakia, in a countryside that should feel peaceful, rolling hills, stone farmhouses, apple orchards just beginning to blossom. But the war is not quite over. You can hear it in the distance, the rumble of artillery, the faint crackle of rifle fire. Not German. Something else. Your sergeant tells you to stay alert. Rumor has it the Soviets are close. You've heard stories about them, tough soldiers, brave, relentless. They've been fighting longer than anyone. They've pushed the Germans all the way back from Stalingrad, from the gates of Moscow. You respect them. Your allies. But you've also heard other things. Whispers. Tensions. That some Soviet commanders don't trust the Americans. That some American officers don't trust the Soviets. That in the confusion of these last days, anything could happen. The forests here are dense and green. The roads are narrow, muddy from spring rain. Communication is poor. Radios crackle with static. Maps are outdated. Units move without knowing exactly where the enemy is, or where their allies are. And so you keep walking. Your boots sink into the soft earth. The air smells like wet leaves and smoke from distant fires. Somewhere nearby, a bird is singing, a small, bright sound against the low hum of engines and distant thunder. You pass through a village. The houses are empty, doors hanging open. The people have fled or are hiding. You see a broken cart in the road, a child's wooden toy lying in the mud. Your unit pauses to rest. Someone lights a cigarette. Someone else opens a ration tin, eating slowly, mechanically. No one speaks much. There's a heaviness in the air, not fear, exactly, but uncertainty. The war is ending, yes, but how? And what comes after? You close your eyes for just a moment, leaning against a stone wall still warm from the afternoon sun. The wind moves through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the low growl of tanks, but you can't tell whose they are. And in that moment, the world feels very large, and very small, all at once. And the wind keeps moving through the trees, soft and endless. It begins with a misunderstanding. On May 4, 1945, American forces are near the town of Susis, in western Czechoslovakia. They've been told to halt their advance, to wait for the Soviets to arrive from the east so the two armies can link up peacefully. But the situation on the ground is fluid. German units are still surrendering, still retreating in chaos. Refugees clog the roads. And the local Czech resistance fighters, brave men and women who have fought in secret for years, are rising up, hoping to liberate their towns before the war officially ends. The Americans want to help them. They want to push forward, to keep liberating. But the orders are clear: stop. Wait. Let the Soviets take Prague. That's the agreement. But not everyone receives those orders. Not everyone understands them. Imagine now a small American reconnaissance unit, maybe a dozen men, moving carefully through the countryside. They've been sent ahead to scout the roads, to check for German holdouts. It's a quiet morning. The sun is breaking through the clouds. The fields are green and still. And then, they see movement. At first, it's unclear. Figures in the distance, near a tree line. Soldiers. But whose? They stop. Raise their binoculars. The uniforms are unfamiliar, not German, but not quite like anything they've seen before. Soviet, maybe? But they're moving strangely. Advancing. Fanning out. The Americans signal. Wave. Try to make contact. No response. And then, a shot. It's impossible to say who fired first. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe a nervous soldier, finger too tight on the trigger. Maybe it was intentional, a Soviet commander who didn't recognize the Americans, who thought they were Germans in captured uniforms. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else. A test. A warning. But the shot rings out, sharp and sudden in the morning air, and everything changes. The Americans take cover. Return fire. Not with fury, not with hatred, but with the instinct of soldiers who have learned to survive. The Soviets do the same. And for a few terrible minutes the two groups exchange bullets across a quiet Czechoslovakian field. No one is killed. By some miracle, or perhaps by some unconscious restraint, the shooting is brief and scattered. Officers on both sides realize something is wrong. Orders are shouted. Cease fire. Cease fire. The firing stops. And then, silence. The Americans pull back. The Soviets hold their ground. Both sides confused, shaken. Both sides wondering what just happened. Later, when reports are filed, the incident is downplayed. A mistake. A miscommunication. These things happen in war. But for the men who were there, it's not so simple. They know what they felt in that moment. The sudden, sickening realization that they were shooting at the wrong people. That the lines had blurred. That the enemy was no longer clear. And as the day goes on, as both armies continue their separate movements, word spreads quietly among the soldiers. Be careful. Watch for friendlies. Don't assume. Because the war is ending, but the peace is not yet certain. You sit that evening by a small fire, your rifle across your lap. The sky is turning violet and gold. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint sound of a Russian song, deep voices, harmonizing. It's beautiful, in a way. Haunting. You wonder if they're wondering the same things you are. And the stars begin to appear, one by one, over the hills. To understand how American and Soviet soldiers ended up exchanging fire, we must pull back, soften our view, and look at the larger picture. The map. The agreements made in rooms far from the battlefield. By the spring of 1945, the Allied leaders, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, had already begun dividing Europe. Not officially, not on paper in any final sense, but in spirit. In understanding. They met at Yalta, in February, on the coast of the Black Sea. They sat together, these three men who had led the world through war, and they discussed what would come after. Germany would be split into zones of occupation. Eastern Europe would fall under Soviet influence. Western Europe under American and British. Lines would be drawn. Spheres of control established. But these were not clean lines. Not yet. And the soldiers on the ground, they didn't know any of this. They didn't know that their governments were already beginning to distrust each other. That the alliance, forged in desperation against Hitler, was already fraying. Imagine, if you will, the mind of a general in those days. Patton, for instance. He disliked the Soviets. Openly. He thought they were a future threat. He wanted to push farther east, to take Prague, to position American forces as far forward as possible. But he was overruled. Eisenhower, the supreme commander, believed in honoring the agreements. Believed in cooperation. Believed that the alliance could hold. And so Patton waited. Fumed. Obeyed. But his soldiers, they could feel his frustration. They could sense the tension. And when they encountered Soviet forces, they were already wary. The Soviets, too, were wary. They had suffered unimaginable losses, millions dead, entire cities destroyed. They had fought their way across 1,000 miles of scorched earth. And now, at the moment of victory, they were suspicious. Suspicious that the Americans and British had delayed opening a second front in France. Suspicious that the West wanted to limit Soviet gains. Suspicious that, perhaps, the next war was already being planned. And so when Soviet commanders saw American units moving in areas they believed were theirs, they reacted. Not always with diplomacy. Not always with patience. This is how wars within wars begin. Not with declarations. Not with grand strategies. But with small moments. A misread map. A misunderstood order. A shot fired in confusion. And in Czechoslovakia, in those final days of the war, there were several such moments. Not just one incident, but a handful. Scattered skirmishes. Brief firefights. Each one quickly contained, quickly hushed. Each one a reminder that the alliance was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. You, the soldier, don't know any of this. You don't know about Yalta. You don't know about the arguments between generals. You only know what you see, another army, another set of soldiers, who look at you with something that isn't quite friendship. You share cigarettes when you can. You trade rations. You smile and nod and try to communicate with gestures. But there's a distance. A coldness beneath the surface. And at night, when you lie in your tent or your foxhole, staring up at the stars, you wonder. What happens now? What happens when the war is over? Will you go home? Will there be peace? Or is this just the beginning of something else? The questions hang in the air, unanswered. The wind moves through the camp. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere, a radio plays softly, Glenn Miller, or Bing Crosby, or maybe a Russian folk tune. And the night settles, quiet and uncertain. Most of the soldiers who were involved in these brief skirmishes never spoke much about them. Not because they were ordered to stay silent, though there may have been some quiet encouragement to let the incidents fade, but because, how do you explain it? How do you tell your family, your friends, that at the end of the war, you found yourself shooting at the people who were supposed to be your allies? It doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the clean story of victory, of good versus evil, of the world united against tyranny. And so, they stayed quiet. But the memories remained. Imagine an American soldier, years later, sitting on his porch in Kansas or Ohio or Georgia. It's a warm summer evening. His children are playing in the yard. His wife is inside making dinner. He's older now, grayer. The war is long behind him. But sometimes, when the light hits a certain way, when he hears a particular sound, he's back there. In Czechoslovakia. In that field. Hearing the crack of rifles. Seeing the muzzle flashes. Feeling the confusion, the disbelief. He never told anyone. Not really. Maybe he mentioned it once, briefly, to a fellow veteran at a reunion. Maybe they nodded, understanding. Maybe they said, "Yeah, something like that happened to us too." Or maybe he kept it entirely to himself. A small, strange fragment of history that didn't fit anywhere. The Soviet soldiers, too, carried these memories. They went home, if they had homes left to return to, and they tried to rebuild their lives. They were celebrated as heroes, as liberators. They marched in parades. They wore their medals. But they also carried the weight of all they had seen. And for some, the strangest weight was this, that in the final days the lines had blurred. That the enemy had shifted. That the world was not as simple as the propaganda had promised. And in Czechoslovakia, the people who lived through those days, they remembered too. They remembered the Americans arriving, hopeful that liberation had come. They remembered the Soviets arriving, bringing a different kind of future. They remembered the brief, confusing moments when the two armies seemed almost at odds. And they wondered what it meant. For decades, these stories stayed quiet. Footnotes in history books, if they appeared at all. Classified reports. Vague references. The Cold War had begun, and no one wanted to talk about the cracks that had appeared even before the war ended. But slowly, over time, the stories emerged. Veterans began to write memoirs. Historians dug through archives. Documents were declassified. And a picture formed, not of a single dramatic battle, but of a series of small, tense encounters. Moments when the future almost went a different way. And what's remarkable, what's almost beautiful, in a sad way, is how restrained both sides were. How quickly the officers stepped in. How quickly the soldiers stopped firing. Because they knew, somewhere deep down, that this wasn't the fight. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They had fought together, after all. They had fought the same enemy. And even in those moments of confusion and fear, they remembered that. You lie down now, your mind drifting through these stories. You think of those soldiers, American and Soviet, walking away from each other that day. You think of the long decades that followed. The Cold War. The walls and borders and suspicions. And you wonder, what if? And the question floats away, soft as smoke. The war in Europe officially ended on May 8, 1945. V-Day. Victory in Europe. Church bells rang. People danced in the streets. Soldiers embraced. The nightmare was over. But in the quiet places, in the forests of Czechoslovakia, in the occupied zones of Germany, in the hearts of the men who had been there, it didn't feel quite like an ending. It felt like a pause. Like the world taking a breath before something new began. Within weeks, the alliance began to fracture. Not loudly. Not with declarations. But with small actions. Border disputes. Refusals to cooperate. Territories that were supposed to be jointly administered, suddenly weren't. The Soviets tightened their grip on Eastern Europe. The Americans and British grew more alarmed. And the soldiers who had briefly fought each other in those final days, they had seen it coming. They had felt it in the air. By 1946, Winston Churchill would give his famous speech about an Iron Curtain descending across Europe. By 1947, the Truman Doctrine would formalize the policy of containment. By 1949, NATO would be formed. The Cold War, though not yet called that, had begun. And the strange, almost forgotten moments in Czechoslovakia, they became a symbol. A warning. A reminder that alliances are fragile. That wars end, but conflicts continue. That the lines we draw on maps are often less clear than we imagine. But let's not end on tension. Let's end on something quieter. Imagine, one last time, a soldier. American or Soviet, it doesn't matter. The war is over. He's going home. He's on a train, or a ship, or perhaps walking along a dusty road. The sun is setting. The sky is painted in shades of orange and pink and deep, calming blue. He's tired. So tired. But he's alive. He thinks about the men he served with. The ones who made it. The ones who didn't. He thinks about the places he saw. The horrors. The small kindnesses. The moments of beauty that appeared, unexpectedly, even in the midst of destruction. And he thinks about that day, that strange day, when he found himself facing soldiers who were supposed to be friends. He doesn't understand it. Maybe he never will. But he knows this, he survived. He's going home. And whatever comes next, he'll face it. The train rocks gently. The rhythm is soothing. He closes his eyes. He lets the motion carry him. And somewhere, in another train, in another country, a Soviet soldier is doing the same. Closing his eyes. Thinking of home. Thinking of the future. They will never meet. They will never know each other's names. But for just a moment, In the spring of 1945, their paths crossed. And the world held its breath. The wars we fight are never as simple as we want them to be. The enemies we face are never as clear. And the peace we hope for, it's always more complicated than we imagine. But still, we hope. And still, we try. The sun sets. The stars appear. The world keeps turning. And you, listening now, let yourself rest. Let these stories settle softly in your mind. Let them become part of the quiet hum of history, always there, always echoing, always reminding us that the past is never truly past. Sleep now. Sleep well. And the night enfolds you, gentle and deep. Thank you for listening tonight. I hope these stories have carried you somewhere peaceful, somewhere between waking and dreaming. Rest now. Let history drift through your thoughts like a gentle stream. We'll meet again soon, with more quiet tales from the past. Good night.